We often hear the term illegal immigrant tossed around in the news, usually as part of a political point or a cold statistic. But for me, that term doesn't conjure up fear or anger. It brings to mind a specific face, a specific laugh, and a specific legacy. In this discussion, I want to explore the intersection of family history, my excitement and hopes for JD Vance when he entered politics, and the moral obligation we have towards our neighbors. I want to talk about luck, love, and my grandfather. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris Damian. I'm a Catholic writer and lawyer, really interested in questions of faith, sexuality, immigration, and much more. So let's dive in. I was talking with my grandfather, and he laughed when he said, I was an illegal. If you've met my grandfather, you'll know that he's a kind, gentle, responsible man who has committed himself to making the world a better place. When he got his first Social Security check in the mail, he tried to return it. He was happy with his lifestyle and didn't feel he needed the money. He's also a peaceful and law-abiding citizen, but he did go through a period where he was, as many have put it, in this country illegally. My grandfather first came to this country on a student visa. He had dreams of becoming an engineer. He worked hard, got his PhD in civil engineering, met the woman who would become his wife while working on the Glen Canyon Dam, and ended up in Lubbock, Texas, working at Texas Tech University and raising 4 children. When he was in his early 30s, he was informed by the Immigration and Naturalization Service, what would eventually become ICE, that his visa had expired and that he would have to leave the country. His visa expiration made him an illegal immigrant. His wife and young children were all US citizens, and he would potentially have to leave them behind. But by luck, he happened to have a friend with connections, and he was able to use those connections to get his visa extended. His family was safe, secure, and together. He eventually became a US citizen, but this country was not always kind to him and his family. When he married my white grandmother, their marriage would have been a crime in more than a dozen states. He shared stories of him and his wife being barred from whites-only businesses. But he made friends and allies, like the friend who helped him stay in the US. And when he bought his first house, a white faculty member insisted on going along with him, warning him that he would likely get an unfair rate as an Indian man. All these years later, the kindness and the friendship is what stands out when my grandfather tells these stories. He's among a number of family members who share stories of discrimination, of being passed over for opportunities or having to work harder than their white peers for the same benefits. But they persisted, and I can feel my own resilience within me as their legacy. My grandfather worked hard and did not let prejudice overtake him. He became a world-renowned engineer, was a guest on Bill Nye, is a member of the National Academy of Engineering, and has overseen research that saves lives and improves the way we obtain energy. Kishore Mehta, my grandfather, is a small man with a big impact. And this country is lucky to have him, just as they are lucky to have had his wife, who chose to love this immigrant man. And just as lucky as they are to have my 2 other grandparents, who were not born US citizens, but who were immigrants in their own way, becoming citizens through the Guam Organic Act of 1950. When JD Vance entered the political arena, I was excited. I had read his book, Hillbilly Elegy, as well as an essay he had written for The Lamp on the impact of his conversion to Catholicism. I loved both. He was smart, he was thoughtful, and while he tended towards conservative politics, his essay in The Lamp highlighted the excesses and failures of both the left and the right. He criticized the left for deflating any sense of responsibility for marginalized or impoverished persons, giving them a hopelessness and a compassion that was like a sympathy for a zoo animal, as he had put it. On the other hand, he criticized the right for its callousness and failure to grapple with the social complexity of those in difficult circumstances. He wrote, I noticed during my research that many of those social problems came from behavior for which social scientists and policy experts had a different vocabulary. On the right, the conversation often turned to culture and personal responsibility, the ways in which individuals or communities held back their own progress. And though it seemed obvious to me that there was something dysfunctional about some of the places in which I'd grown up, the discourse on the right seemed a little heartless. It failed to account for the fact that destructive behaviors were almost always tragedies with terrible consequences. It's one thing to wag your finger at another person for failing to act a certain way, but it's something else to feel the weight of the misery that comes from those actions. When Vance entered politics, I was really hopeful that this thoughtful, intelligent Catholic could bring a more measured, nonpartisan, and thoughtful voice to public discourse. His vice presidential campaign felt like a punch in the gut. A key moment that stands out for me is when Vance publicly spread the false claim that Haitian immigrants were abducting and eating the pets of community members in Springfield, Ohio. He had represented the community as senator and alleged he he was representing his constituents. President Trump amplified that claim during the first presidential debate. Then, Springfield started receiving bomb threats, and much of the Haitian immigrant community began living in fear. These extremely powerful men had used the national stage to further marginalize an extremely marginalized community. Springfield police clarified that the claims were incorrect, and that there had been no credible reports or specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the Springfield immigrant community. Vance then tweeted, "It's possible, of course, that all these rumors were turned out to be false." But in that tweet, he then spread another false claim, that a child was murdered by a Haitian immigrant. The father of the child who died called Vance's comments reprehensible, criticizing Vance for using his dead child as a political tool, and said he wanted an apology. Vance never apologized to that father of the dead child. Vance later said, quote, "If I have to create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do." This is a very different man from the Catholic convert who gave me hope for this country's political future. The dismay over his approach to immigrants seems to be shared by the new leader of the Catholic Church, Pope Leo XIV. Prior to his elevation to the papacy, the Twitter account under his name had shared an article criticizing Vance's use of the Christian concept of ordo amoris. In an interview, Vance had used the concept to critique progressive compassion towards immigrants. Vance said, "You love your family, and then you love your neighbor, and then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens in your own country, and then after that, you can focus on and prioritize the rest of the world. A lot of the far left has completely inverted that. Just Google ordo amoris." The article critiquing Vance acknowledged the practical realities of life involve us prioritizing our care and attention. But it also argued that the Christian concept of love is one of abundance. It reminded us that when Jesus asked, "Who is my neighbor?" the answer is the Samaritan, someone who would have been identified at the time as a stranger, a foreigner, an enemy. Jesus finds a key source of love here. Similarly, in 2020, the future Pope spoke in a homily for the World Day of Migrants and Refugees in Peru, saying, "Let us take a moment to reflect on the reality we are living here in Peru today, especially with regard to migration. In recent years, more than 800,000 Venezuelan migrants have arrived here. Today, Peru ranks second only to the United States in the number of asylum requests. In the Lambayeque region alone, it's estimated that there are about 15,000 people, 2,500 migrant families, with whom we now share our land. But Jesus asks more of us. Simply sharing territory is not enough, is it? We must learn more and more to welcome others, to receive them with generosity." As someone who spent years studying Thomas Aquinas and Catholic theology and philosophy, I have to admit that JD Vance is not entirely wrong. Aquinas does state that even if there is a call to love all men equally out of charity and wishing them happiness, there is also an ordo amoris, an order of charity, or we ought out of charity to love more intensely those who are more closely united to us. There is a basis of love that we owe to all people, but there are special responsibilities of love that we have to those in greater proximity to us. What JD Vance gets wrong is how we understand this proximity. Diana Daniels is a Springfield, Ohio resident who had been critical of the local handling of issues related to immigration. In the aftermath of Vance's comments and the spotlight shown on her community, Daniels criticized the city commission for shutting down discussions of concerns related to the influx of immigrants. At city commission meetings, Daniels had raised many concerns related to the ways in which migration had changed Springfield. During that time, Daniels did not articulate the concerns of the Haitian community as her own. But life changes us. Ordo amoris is not a static concept. Our responsibilities and our sense of kin evolves over time. We do not have the same responsibilities towards strangers in other countries as we do towards members of the communities in which we live. But when someone leaves their past community and enters our own, things change. When someone enters our community, Christian teaching calls us to a certain responsibility towards them. And as they spend more time in our community, as we grow in proximity and develop roots as one another's neighbors, our responsibilities evolve. This includes immigrants who come into our communities and become members of them. It becomes even more the case over time as they build new lives and families in our communities. This is natural. In April of that year, Diana Daniels then shared that her opinion of her Haitian neighbors had changed. She said, "I know a lot of Haitians. I have several that live next to the store where I work. I've had plenty of conversations that I wish I'd never had because they're things I didn't want to know, but now know, and they've changed my perspective, pivoting away from being angry about an illegal being here to realizing that there were two sets of victims. They are victims just as well as we are." In that April interview with PBS, Daniels was asked about the diverse population of Springfield, and she shared the community she really doesn't identify with is not the Haitians, but the wealthy members of the local country club. She said, "Springfield united, neighbors united, That's your country club crowd. Those are people that don't have to deal with somebody from another culture on a daily basis. Don't tell me that I have to be their neighbor, because that's what these folks are doing. Daniels actually identifies the local Haitians as her neighbors. She places the local immigrant Haitian community alongside the suffering citizen community in Springfield. If she were to articulate an ordo amoris, she'd likely place her Haitian community members before the white country club members. It's because of proximity and because of time. While Vance may classify ordo amoris according to citizenship status or race or culture, Daniels orders her community based upon those who are nearest to her, both in terms of physical distance and also in terms of shared concerns and realities. In their public rhetoric around deportation, Trump and Vance have argued that they would target criminals for deportation, and they have deported many criminals. But that's not all. Deportees have also included an 11-year-old U.S. citizen fighting brain cancer. Those detained for deportation include grandmothers with no criminal record, doctoral students whose only offense were opinion pieces in campus papers, hardworking laborers with valid work permits, and immigrants attempting to follow legal processes through court hearings. Less than 5% of those detained have convictions for violent crimes, and more than 70% have no criminal convictions of any kind. President Trump himself, a convicted criminal, has more serious criminal convictions than the majority of immigrants being targeted currently. So this isn't about crime. This is about targeting certain kinds of people. For those who are Trump supporters and may be skeptical of the fairness of his criminal process, I hope that this fact may lead them to consider the unfairness faced by countless immigrants who lack the resources to defend themselves that have been available to the billionaire Donald Trump. Many immigrants are so vulnerable that even ICE agents have believed that they could get away with sexually abusing them, as one agent did with a 17-year-old immigrant girl in Minnesota. In reality, the data shows that as a whole, immigration strengthens communities and tends to lessen crime rates. Undocumented immigrants are arrested at less than half the rate of U.S. citizens, which means that if all undocumented immigrants were removed from the country, then crime rates per capita would actually increase. With an estimated average cost of $236 per day per person for detention, 70,000 people in detention, and 70% of those without a criminal record, our government is currently wasting more than $11 million per day detaining people with no criminal record. I look at all the suffering immigrants in this country and I think of my grandfather. We were lucky. He had overstayed his visa. He was an illegal alien, but he had connections and he wasn't living under the Trump presidency. If he had that status today, we would fear daily that he could be arrested, sent into custody, and imprisoned in another state where we may not be able to find out his whereabouts for days or weeks. We would tell him to never leave the house for months, maybe years. We would have to pull together money for a lawyer and find the strength to support each other. I would have to support my family in distress while trying to manage my own misery in that situation, while also knowing members of my community would look at him callously and say he's getting what he deserves. I feel fury sometimes when I see what vulnerable immigrants are going through today because I know my family is avoiding that misery simply because of luck, because of timing. I look into history and I have to wonder where I can stand. What would I have done in another moment like this one? Anne Frank wrote in her diary on June 13th in 1943, "Terrible things are happening outside. Poor, helpless people are being dragged out of their homes. Families are torn apart. Men, women, and children are separated. Children come home from school to find that their parents have disappeared." Anne Frank could have been writing about the United States in 2026. What I do today is what I would have done if I would have been living in her time. So I choose not to be silent. I choose to take inspiration from her calling, and I write. In his vision of ordo amoris, Vance does not seem to really be looking at proximity. Rather, he divides existing communities by legal status. When it comes to my grandfather, my ordo amoris has nothing to do with legal status. It has everything to do with the fact that he is my grandfather. When I see people arguing that all these people should just be deported, I hear them talking about my grandfather where he once was. He had no more right to be in this country than many who are being targeted today. I have to ask myself, if he were in that situation, who would have stood up for him? Who would have spoken out for him? And who would have callously turned away? Who would have placed my grandfather in their ordo amoris? Would I wish that more had? I look into so many of these immigrants and I see his face. I see my future. I'm sharing this because of the life my grandparents worked so hard to create for me, and because of the sheer luck that has secured it. I try to find a way to look into them and place them within my own ordo amoris. I understand why so many Americans don't identify with the plight of immigrants and refugees today. Often these immigrants and refugees don't look like them, but they look like me, like my grandfather, like so many of my friends. And I would encourage you to consider our faces when you see them. And then there are immigrants like many from the Philippines, who had to wait a decade or more in order to legally immigrate to this country. For them, the difficult process of immigration that they chose to follow can breed a resentment towards those who snuck across the border in a matter of days or weeks. I suppose all I can say to them is, consider yourself lucky if you were able to wait that decade in safety, with food and shelter and hope for a new life. Many sneaking across the border don't have these. They're risking death to come here. In 1865, the United States was nearing its centennial of independence. The French historian and abolitionist Edouard de la Boulaye proposed a statue as a gift to the country, celebrating the centennial, the perseverance of American democracy, and the abolition of slavery in the United States. The statue would eventually become the Statue of Liberty. To raise money for the statue's pedestal, American poet Emma Lazarus wrote a poem that would eventually be titled The New Colossus and commemorated on a plaque on the pedestal. The Statue of Liberty became an icon of freedom and a symbol of welcome to immigrants arriving to the harbor where she could be seen. The plaque within her includes the lines from the New Colossus, "Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beaconed hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep ancient lands your storied pomp," cries she, with silent lips. "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." This image of American greatness is what I carry with me as I share all of this. At the turn of the century and the ending of our great national shame, the institution of slavery, what epitomized American freedom and greatness was the ways in which we differed from the greatness prioritized by other nations. We were not like the brazen giant of Greek fame that celebrated conquering. Rather, we were intended to be a light to the nations, a mighty woman with a torch who receives exiles with glowing worldwide welcome. We saw the glory that other countries would bestow upon themselves with storied pomp, and we told them that they could keep this. Rather than pomp and their great lands, we would take your tired, your poor, and this would be our greatness. As a country, I lift my lamp beside the golden door. The Statue of Liberty held her great lamp beside the golden door, the harbor receiving those exiles, those tired, those poor. Our country's leaders want to extinguish that lamp, to bolt the door shut. Protests are happening because we refuse to let them. Thanks for listening. If you want to follow along for more, you can hit subscribe. Feel free to like this, share what you think in the comments. You can also find me at C. Damian Writes on YouTube, Instagram, and more.